How are you guys doing? Hopefully you didn't miss me too much, but I'm kind of glad that we still have this opportunity to talk and to discuss philosophy, logic in particular, and I can help you out hopefully a little bit. It was kind of difficult to get all this stuff together for online lectures, which turned out to be somewhat different than what I normally would expect, and I apologize if it's going to seem a little weird and raw, and because it is kind of difficult to do that in this strange way, talking to the camera rather than to class as usual. But nonetheless, let's try to do our best. Hopefully I can explain it to you, and if you have any questions, as usual, you can message me or send me an email. But I do want to clarify some of the things, especially from chapter 4, because we did not talk at all about chapter 4, and it's a huge shame. I really should have given you at least some information, because it's difficult to understand it on your own. So the few things I want to go back to chapter 4 and refresh for you. In particular, chapter 4 is about categorical propositions, right? Standard form categorical propositions. What is it? What are the categorical propositions, first of all, and what is the standard form of a categorical proposition? These are two questions which you really should be able to answer, and I don't know if you do, if you are, but nonetheless, let me explain. So, categorical proposition, what is it? Well, first of all, remember what is a proposition. A proposition is a statement that has true or false value. How can it be categorical? Well, it has to have at least two components. Here's an example of categorical proposition, slightly different than what they have in a book. Nonetheless, it is a categorical proposition. Socrates is mortal. Now, we do have two classes of things here. We have Socrates and we have mortality. So, in logic, we do say that this would be your subject term. That makes sense, right? It is a subject of a statement. And this would be a predicate. Pretty much any time you have a subject and a predicate, that would be a categorical proposition. But it's not always in standard form. How can we put it in standard form? What is required in order for a categorical proposition to be in standard form? Well, first of all, we need to have a quantifier. And quantifiers can be all, no, or some. So note that this proposition does not have a quantifier. We can, in a second, see how we can add a quantifier there. But right now it doesn't have it. Other than the quantifier, it should have a subject and a predicate term, but there are some requirements to them too. In particular, it says Socrates here. Well, we cannot have a category with just one member. So personal names are actually not allowed as terms. So what are we going to do? What can we do about that? Well, we can actually say something like all people identical to Socrates. And then we created this class, a category of people with one member, Socrates. However, it does now satisfy the requirement of a term in a standard form categorical proposition. You can remember, we are talking about standard form. So, all people identical to Socrates would be our subject term. Now then it should have a copula. And again, copula is a standard for standard form categorical proposition, so that formula, copula, should be either are or are not. So is doesn't work for us. We have to replace is. We can, since we're talking about all people identical to Socrates, say are. And finally, the predicate term, again, mortal. Mortal is an adjective. It doesn't work. it has to be a class of things. But again, there is an easy solution here. We can say mortal people, or people who are mortal. So all people identical to Socrates are people who are mortal. It seems a little heavy, right? It's not as nice as Socrates is mortal. However, it does satisfy the standard form categorical proposition requirement. So again, if you did not understand what is a standard form categorical proposition, it should have a quantifier which can be either all, no, or some, nothing else, but it has to be there. It should have subject term and a predicate term. Both of them cannot be personal names or adjectives. And it should have a copula, which for most of them will be are, but in some cases, for some, it can also be are not. Are or are not. Nothing else. Is no good. So now we have turned it into standard form categorical proposition. Now, there are 4 types of standard form categorical propositions. Let's just list them all, and you should know them. Okay, hopefully you remember that, right? If you don't, you're in trouble, because you will really need it for chapter 5. So let's look at them. A, E, I, and O. This actually seems to be, not seems to be, it actually is a complete list of all possible relations which two propositions can, which two terms rather can have in a proposition. So A would be all S, R, P. S and P here stands for pretty much anything. It's just a subject and predicate term. E would be no, S, R, P. I would be some, S, R, P. And finally, O would be what? Well, you do remember that, right? Some, S, R, not. Okay, this is all for it. Now, each one has a particular Venn diagram. So let's just refresh on that too. What is a Venn diagram? You have two circles there, right? Two overlapping circles in each single case. Lovely. Yes, there you go. But you draw different things in them, and you essentially just draw two types of drawings, and this is either shading or an X. The shading shows that this part is completely empty. There cannot be anything there. It's blocked. And an X shows that there is at least one thing there. We don't know if there's more than one, but at least one. Okay, so how do we actually draw these four? Well, for A, we shade this part. This is subject term, this is predicate term. So we shade the subject term outside of the P circle, showing that there is absolutely no S which is not a P. All S are P, that's what it tells us. For E, we actually do that to the middle part, the overlapping part, right? And we do that because we want to show that there's actually nothing connecting them. They're completely separate. For I, we put an X right here, and that X shows us that they actually are connected. There's at least one thing, and again, there could be more than one, but there is at least one thing which is both an S and a P. Some S or P means at least one S is a P. And finally, for some S are not P, we put an X here, and just to show that there is at least one S which is not P. Could be more, but at least one. Now, this is from Boolean standpoint. Hopefully you didn't get too confused with Aristotelian standpoint, but just to recap it a little bit, it kind of adds something for these two, just for these two universal prepositions. And remember, these two are universal and these two are particular. How do you recognize them? Well, there's an easy way. Particular has the word some. If you see the word some, that is a particular preposition. If you don't, then that would be a universal. So, what is the difference? In Aristotelian standpoint, for universal prepositions, we do assume an existence as long as the thing we're talking about, our S-class, actually does exist, such as Socrates, for example. And that kind of adds a little important thing to our diagram. We have to put an X with a circle, either here for A or here. That just shows us there is something there. And this is a big important difference. In Boolean standpoint, we do not assume the existence here or here, which essentially creates the situation when they can both be true. You can say, how can it be? How is it possible that A and E, all SRP, is true in the same time as no SRP? Well, if S-class is empty, then it can actually very easily be accomplished. So, suppose I don't have any money, right? And I tell you, all my money are in my pocket. Is that true? Well, I don't have any, so of course it's true. All of them are there, because nothing is there. But wouldn't it also in the same time be true then that none of my money are in my pocket? Because again, I don't have any. All of them are there, none of them are there, because there is nothing. It's empty. But as soon as I get at least $1, that situation no longer applies. Now I can't have both, right? Either all of my money are in my pocket, that means the dollar is there, or no, none of my money are in my pocket. That means this dollar is somewhere else, in a bank maybe. So this is the important difference there. And it is important to understand this difference in order to move on. Now, the only other thing which you really should know is we went over universal and particular. Well, there is another way to distinguish them. We have affirmative and negative. Right? So if you draw them this way, and for the exam I typically would let students draw it this way, but now it's pretty much open book, so it doesn't matter. If you draw it this way, you can immediately see these two are affirmative, these two are negative, these two are universal, and these two are particular. It's like a grid of some sort. Okay, so this is what you should know going into chapter 5. Let's take a brief look at chapter 5. Well, maybe not very brief, but let's take a look nonetheless. Okay, 5.1. We'll just cover 5.1 today because I don't want to go too far into it before, well, in one video anyway. Okay, so categorical syllogisms. Remember, here in chapter 4, we were talking about categorical propositions. Now, categorical syllogism, you hopefully remember from the beginning of class, actually has 3 categorical propositions. And so 2 of them would be a premises and 1 conclusion. Remember, that's why it's syllogism. It has exactly 2 premises and 1 conclusion. And the purpose in chapter 4 was just to draw immediate inferences from one to the other proposition. Let's briefly again look at what the hell was it? What were you doing there? What are the immediate inferences? Okay, let's take a look. Let's take a look at a proposition, which would be, for example, all soldiers are patriots, and say some soldiers are patriots. Just a two of them, right? This is not a syllogism. But can we draw inference from this one to this one? This is what you guys were doing in chapter 4. I don't know how well you understood what you were doing there, but this is the idea. So can we? Well, let's look at it. I mean, if you think about it, suppose it is true here, and by default it is true that all soldiers are patriots. Wouldn't it be true that some soldiers are patriots? Well, clearly, if all of them are patriots, at least some of them will be, right? So this is your simple immediate inference, right? It means you can validly go from here to here. In what situation would you not be able to do it? Well, suppose we have something like, it is false. But some soldiers are patriots as your second proposition. Can you draw this inference? Now you're going from all soldiers are patriots to it is false that some soldiers are patriots. Now clearly that doesn't make any sense, right? If this is true, this one cannot be true as well. So this is problematic, and therefore you cannot draw an inference here. And this is the important difference between them. Okay, so now we are kind of ready for chapter 5, 5.1. Since 5.1 talks about syllogisms, we have more than 2 of them. So we will need a conclusion too. This would be our premises. What could be our conclusion? Well, let's use the example from the book. It actually has no soldiers or patriots. No traitors, sorry, patriots. This is what the book gives us, no traitors, patriots, and the conclusion there is, therefore, no traitors or soldiers. So this is a categorical syllogism. Lovely. Categorical syllogism. Okay. It is a deductive argument, and therefore we can look at its validity. And this is generally what the chapter, the entire chapter 5 is about. Checking the validity of categorical syllogisms. Do you remember what validity is? You should by now. I repeated it like 20 times, but let me go through it again. Valid deductive argument is the argument in which, if premises are true, the conclusion is what? Guaranteed to be true. There will be no situation with true premises and false conclusion. That is impossible. That will never happen. But how can we check? I mean, just by looking at it, can you immediately say, is it valid? Is it not valid? Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. And the methods for determining whether or not it is valid or invalid were created by no other than Aristotle, who we mentioned many, many times before. Aristotle actually was the first one to work with categorical syllogisms and work out a system which has been refined quite a bit during the 19th century in order for us to be able to determine validity of a categorical syllogism with 100% certainty. Okay, so let's see, what are we doing here? Standard form, mood, and figure. This is what we'll be talking about today. Now, each of the 3 terms in a categorical syllogism has its own name, depending on its position in an argument. We have exactly 3 terms. So, 2 of them will always be in your conclusion. This is called minor term, and this would be your major term. Now, there's still one more term left, isn't there? Patriots. So patriots is your middle term. Middle term is the one which is not in the conclusion, but only in the premises. So you'll always have exactly 3 terms, and each one of them is there twice. Okay. My cat wants to help us out a little bit. Anyway, let's move on. So, in this case, major term would be soldiers, minor term would be traders, and middle term would be patriots. And now we can talk about the standard form of categorical syllogism. What exactly is a standard form categorical syllogism? Well, it actually has 4 requirements. Requirement number 1, all 3 statements must be standard form categorical propositions. We just talked about that. What is a standard form categorical proposition? They all must have quantifier, they all must have copula, and they all must have 2 clearly determined terms. Now, the 2 occurrences of each term must be identical. That is the second requirement. So again, each one of them must be there twice. The third requirement, each term must be used in the same sense. Well, it kind of makes sense. For example, if you have a term bank, all banks are financial institutions, and then suddenly you start talking about some banks are banks of the river. This is not the same sense, right? Bank must be uniformly used in the same sense throughout your syllogism. Now, the fourth requirement for standard form categorical syllogism is the most important one, and this is that you must always have major premise, the one which has your major term, on top. This is very important, and you will see in a moment why it is important. So, again, the major term, which is soldiers, must be in the preposition which is on top, and your minor term, which is traders, must be in the second place, not the other way around. Now, in general, for the purposes of validity, the order of premises doesn't matter, but for standard form it matters, and you will see why, like I said, in a second. Okay, you have a nice picture in the book. Take a look at it. Again, it sums it all up. Quantifiers, all no. Copulas are and terms. Soldiers here, traders here, patriots here. This is the requirement. Now, the book gives us another example. Let's take a look at it. It's a lovely example. Let's take a look. Erase all this stuff. Okay. So here's the $1 million question. Is it standard form? This is a categorical syllogism, alright. But is it in standard form? How do we check? Well, first of all, do they all have quantifiers? Yes, they do. All, some. Do they have copulas? Yes, they do. R. Is there exactly 3 terms? Yes, there is. Paintings, watercolors, and masterpieces. Now, what is the last requirement? And yeah, they all used in the same sense, obviously. What's the last one? That's right. Your major term, your major premise must be first. How do you know which one is major? Well, look at your conclusion. Remember, this would be your major term, masterpieces. Where should it be? Right, that should be on top. Is it? No, actually, that's where it is. It's not on top. That's a problem. What do we do? Okay, that's a very simple solution. Some watercolors and masterpieces should just go on top. Like I said, the order actually doesn't matter for the purposes of validity, but it does matter for standard form. Now it is standard form. This is important. Okay. Once you've done that, you got it in a standard form, now you can move on, but not before you do an exercise. So exercise is there. It has a different categorical syllogism. The question there is to identify major, minor, and middle terms. Please do so on your own time. The answer is, of course, there on, you can see it, but you should try it first. Okay, so now we can actually give a formal definition of categorical syllogism. We didn't do it yet. Now we can. The formal definition is a categorical syllogism is a deductive argument consisting of 3 categorical propositions that is capable of being translated into standard form. It doesn't have to be in a standard form in order for it to be categorical syllogism. For example, if over here you have every master color is a painting, that would still be a categorical syllogism. It's just not going to be in standard form. How can we turn it into standard form? Well, we'll have to just reverse it. Right? We'll have to do what we had before. All watercolors are paintings. Now it is in standard form. So as long as it's capable of being translated into standard form, it qualifies as a categorical syllogism. Okay. Now mood and figure. Well, actually this is where it becomes important to have it in standard form, because in order to get a mood, which is super easy, you have to have it in standard form first. How do you get a mood? Very simple. The letter names of all 3 categorical propositions would be your mood. So what do we have here? We have I, we have A, and then we have I again. Remember, this is what you should know. So your mood will be A, I. That's your mood. Now you see why it is important to have them in the correct order? Because the way we had it before, all watercolors are painting, some watercolors are masterpieces, you would have actually gotten A, I. And that is the wrong mood. The right mood is I. And it makes a lot of difference.